Welcome back once again. Episode 2 of Battlebots has just aired, and I've got some things I want to say about it. Another exciting bot bashing episode. Let's get started. So, I don't have much to say in the intro, except how do you expect Fusion to not light themselves on fire when you're roasting them like this? Oh my goodness, like they do not let up throughout this episode. Every time Fusion is mentioned, it just gets brought up how it lights itself on fire. Now, getting into the first fight, it was Sawblades versus Hypershock, which, oh my goodness, I was excited right out of the gate. Hypershock is obviously a pretty powerful robot when everything works well. It's fast, it can be a lot of fun to watch, but Sawblades is always such an entertaining, well-driven machine. I love watching that thing every time, so I knew immediately this was going to be good. And as I saw Sawblades, I was thinking, oh my god, how many different types of wedgelets does Sawblades have? It has the two longer wedgelets, it's got a few medium ones, and it's got a bunch of short ones as well. This felt so weirdly over the top, but I imagine it's extremely effective, so I can't really fault them, honestly, and it still fits the general aesthetic. Sawblades looks awesome. Speaking of looking awesome, Hypershock as ever looks like a beast. Now immediately Sawblades started off with the better ground clearance, some very good shots from Hypershock in return, but then got flipped over, and after that it was all a struggle for Hypershock. Flailing, wriggling around, trying to avoid Sawblades, but Sawblades taking out a tire, taking out an entire wheel, and then one last hit to the belly of Hypershock, and Sawblades was stuck! I can't believe it! Now, whenever this happens, the fight will be briefly stopped to try and unstick the robots. If it can't be done, then the fight ends. And they couldn't do it. The first fight ending due to the fact that they got stuck. Now, Sawblades ends up winning due to the judge's decision, but I gotta say that's more than well deserved, because if they'd have gotten free, I imagine Hypershock would have been counted out anyway. It looked like it was dead for me. Now, to give an idea on just how stuck they were, later on in the episode they show the hammer arm of Sawblades has actually been detached from the rest of the robot because it's so stuck to Hypershock. And then later on from that, they finally get it free. My god. Saying that, listen, I know you're joking, but we'd all want to see Hyperblaze, right? Right? And this was definitely a fun first fight, but I understand with the kind of like abrupt ending with the fact that the robots got stuck, I can see now why it didn't get put into episode 1. Looking at Sawblaze's schedule, it looks pretty darn tough, but we know that Sawblades is a top tier robot, so they're not going to go down without a fight. Plus, if we haven't seen Sawblades versus Sawblades by now, it's long overdue, so these are going to be some exciting battles. Hypershock's also got a really quite difficult schedule. Whiplash, Endgame. Claw Viper seems like it'll be the easiest one for Hypershock to deal with, but even then, Hypershock is gonna have to really up its game in these next few fights. Then we had Emulsifier versus Fusion, which I knew should be a lot of fun. Fusion is apparently more reliable due to the, to try and avoid some of the heat concerns, so it doesn't set itself on fire. And Emulsifier looked so sturdy. I was definitely worried about it going up against the vertical end because they had nothing really to deal with the wedgelets, but I knew this was going to be fun either way. The fight begins now. Admittedly, Emulsifier's weapon didn't seem to be working well at first, and we got a few massive hits from Fusion, showing a lot of power in that machine. It's surprising just how much power is packed into this robot. There's so much going on, you'd think that it wouldn't be able to dish out the hits it does. Now, because Emulsifier seemed to be struggling, Fusion just kept picking away, and I thought that this was going to be the Quantum versus Shredderator of the episode, because it just didn't look like it was going to go in Emulsifier's way. But then, Emulsifier's weapon started working, and Fusion, after a few hits, was on fire once again. Just as I thought it had become a squash match, the two had managed to deal heavy damage to each other. Even with the fire, they both kept going. The fight ended up going to Fusion, which, given Emulsifier's state at the end and how they were doing in the beginning, I kind of see why. This to me was an excellent fight. When I see a spinner on spinner fight, there's either one or two things that I want to see happen. I either want to see a robot get sent into orbit, get completely obliterated, or I want to see a fight, a back and forth tussle where the robots are knocking lumps out of each other and keep on going until either the judges come in or you finally get that one last knockout blow. I feel like we finally really got to see Fusion's potential come out here, and of course Emulsifier in its debut heavyweight fight looked really impressive. Now Emulsifier's schedule does look pretty doable. I definitely think that there's going to be some fights which are going to be trickier than others. Malice could be quite an interesting battle for it, but I could see Emulsifier leaving with a decent record at least. Fusion's schedule, meanwhile, is rough. I feel like the legacy of the Waiachi robots is definitely influencing that somewhat, but I really hope that Fusion can step up to the plate and show that this is no fluke and that it is going to be more than capable of taking on the competition. Then came Valkyrie versus Mammoth, and I already knew this was not going to be Mammoth's night. Valkyrie is a low-to-the-ground robot. It has less for Mammoth to get a hold of. I mean, we saw the same thing when it was fighting Hijinx. There wasn't a lot for Mammoth to grab onto. Now the fight begins, and Mammoth rushed out of the gate, but once again, I realized there was no grip. It seems that Mammoth's leg, however, caught the spinner of Valkyrie, and I was thinking, hang on, are we about to see Valkyrie's spinner potentially burn out due to this? This is like an entanglement device almost. They thankfully got free, so the fight didn't have to be stopped, and Mammoth really couldn't do much of anything as Valkyrie slowly picked them apart. And I do mean slowly. They were very cautious with their driving. They'd go in, do a few hits, back out, do a few hits, back out. The very different driving style for Valkyrie this season. But what did Mammoth in the end, after it lost half of its drive, was the entire lifter broke. Mammoth ended up done after that point, and the win went to Valkyrie. Now I'm going to be honest, the fight was disappointing. Mammoth really can't do a lot in these situations, so it just wasn't as entertaining as I'd normally expect from it. And Valkyrie, just, you know, while that driving style was very effective and I can tell that they're trying to be more competitive, it didn't make for the most exciting fight in my opinion. Still, overall, that lifter breaking like that was a major deal and definitely made for a big moment of the episode. Now Valkyrie's schedule looks really interesting. It's fights I could see it doing quite decently with, but I can't judge how well it's going to do. This is definitely going to be very entertaining either way though. And Mammoth's schedule looks rough, with robots that are not going to be easy for Mammoth to do its usual thing on. I worry for them. Good luck to them, because it looks like that Battlebots is really trying to make this Battlebot go extinct. Now for the next fight, Jameson Go actually joined as part of the commentary team, which I gotta say, like, just saying it right here, this was an incredible addition. I hope we get to see more of it throughout the season. Getting to see that additional insight from people who are building the robots is great. Don't get me wrong, I love Chris and Kenny, but it's great to have not only just their excitable commentary, but someone who can really give that detailed insight. And this should hopefully fill the Pete Abramson-shaped hole in our hearts. Anyway, the match that he was joining the commentary for was for Whiplash versus Mad Catter, which I knew already could end up being an amazing match. Now, right at the gate, there was a bit of a deadlock. The lifting arm of Whiplash was working quite nicely, but the spinner didn't seem to be. Meanwhile, Mad Catter's spinner was going nice and hard, but at first wasn't able to get a good shot in. But it didn't take that long, as Mad Catter soon got a nice hit in, which took a little bit for Whiplash to recover from, and Mad Catter, in a very smart decision, actually got their lifting arm out of the way, utilising the reach of the spinner. At least that's what it felt like to me. And they were able to get some massive hits in that sent Whiplash flying. And then Mad Catter, with a huge hit, ramming them into the screws and hitting with that spinner, sent Whiplash high into the air, taking Whiplash out. That was a pretty damn good fight. I still think that Emulsifier and Fusion was the match of the night, but this had to have been a close second for me. It was definitely a great showcase for Mad Catter. I was a little bit sad that Whiplash didn't get to do much itself, but these things can happen, and I'm sure Whiplash can redeem itself. Now, Whiplash has a tough schedule ahead of it. Normally, I'd have expected them to go 4-0 with a schedule like this, but based on this initial performance, I am a little bit uncertain. I don't think they're out just yet, but they'll definitely need to come back harder than ever for the extra fights. And Mad Catter's schedule is just as rough in my opinion, but based on that stellar performance, I'd say that they've got a good fighting chance. Obviously, it's way too early to judge schedules this early on, but based on this opening performance, yeah, they're doing pretty darn well. Now, here was a fight I was excited to see. Switchback versus Banshee. I mean, Switchback's new design looks so good, and Banshee was a design I was interested to see. Although, I already started to worry when they started tempering my expectations about Banshee's power, pointing out that it was more about getting a number of flips in and getting control, rather than sending robots into orbit. And so the fight starts off, Banshee misses a flip, Switchback ends up getting a small glance with the spinner, and then the death hum begins. A small flip comes from Banshee, and I do mean a small one, and I could see immediately why my expectations were tempered. There were some nice overhead shots from Switchback, some decent flips from Banshee, which put the arm back, which actually ended up being probably a very costly decision, as it meant that that Switchback was able to get in more decent blows throughout the fight. The fight ended up being a pretty good back and forth. Neither robot was really doing anything that amazingly, but Switchback kept going in with some shots. Banshee was definitely not giving up. It got some good flips in throughout, but in the end, Switchback ended up winning the judge's decision. I'll be honest, I thought this fight was definitely a little bit weak. I think that's possibly because I just hyped this up to myself. I was expecting huge things from these robots, and maybe that wasn't fair. So I'm willing to accept that I probably set my expectations way too high for these robots, but it just didn't really wow me. Both robots did show some moments of potential, and I think if they can continue to work to achieve that, they could be quite interesting. But overall, I will admit I was a little disappointed. Now, Switchback's schedule is very interesting, and they'll need to work on that performance if they want to stand a chance against robots like Death Roll. Meanwhile, Banshee is really going to be put through its paces with its schedule. It'll be interesting to see if it sinks or swims with a lineup like that, but I'll admit it doesn't look good for them. Then we got the main event hype package, and it was a great way of advertising it. Two teams that got so close last season and had a lot to prove. Endgame, of course, being a former champion, further elevated it, as well as them being a Golden Bolt winner. You know, they were the clear favourites, but it was made very clear that these were two robots where anything could happen. So I was excited even before this, but these hype packages are so well edited. But we have one more match between us and the main event, as Hijinx takes on Big Dill. Now, Hijinx came out with their heaviest bar, while Big Dill came out with its strongest wedge, meaning that you didn't get to see the spinner this episode. Now, the fight began, and Hijinx goes tails first. Now, I'm assuming that they keep doing this to let the bar spin up, so if a robot rushes into them, it's a little bit more difficult for an opponent to jam the bar up and stop it from getting up to speed. They get a good first hit in, but then Big Dill gets them and runs them into the wall, flipping them over. Their lifter ended up being stuck, however, which ended up being catastrophic. Now that Hijinx's bar was higher up, it meant they could get some really good hits in on that arm and just do some damage. After some big hits, Big Dill's drive began to suffer, while Hijinx's bar seemed to give up. Then with one last half-hearted push into the screws, Big Dill caught on fire. We had a smoked pizza, and now we've got a burning pickle. It's with them and the Grillmaster fusion, it's like Hell's Kitchen in Battlebots recently. Overall, this fight was also pretty disappointing to me, with neither robot faring as well as I'd have expected. Hijinx did do pretty well overall, so I don't want to seem too harsh to them. Their robots seem to be working pretty well, and I feel like there could be some exciting moments there. Big Dill will definitely need to figure out what caused them to burn out like they did, because I gotta say that was a bit unfortunate. Now, Big Dill's schedule is not easy at all. If they can tune that reliability, they will stand a chance, but they really are. That is going to really hinge their chances, in my opinion. Hijinx's schedule, meanwhile, has me excited. I mean, Ripperoni versus Hijinx seems like it could end up being crazy. Two gigantic spinners going at each other. That's the kind of thing that I can't wait to see that. That's all I can say. Like, the possibilities, if those two get up to speed and just slam into each other, that should be fun to watch. Now, heading into the main event, I knew that Endgame was going to have the advantage here. Like, I love Blip, and honestly, if I was to pick one, I'd probably want Blip to win just that little bit more, but as tough and compact as they are, Endgame is one of the best vertical spinners in the heavyweight scene. Just so powerful, so well built. I just did not like Blip's chances. Now the fight begins, Endgame gets a few good digs in, but Blip then pins Endgame, which I did not expect to see. That's definitely not the tactic I was expecting them to go for. A big shot from Endgame though takes out most of the wedgelets on Blip and leaves them basically done. Yeah, they were still moving, but how were they going to get under? Not only did they basically only have like 1 or 2 wedgelets, but Endgame had that extremely well-designed wedgelet system of their own. Although I gotta say that there was a nice hit from the pulverizer onto Endgame, so the Blip team was trying their best here. There was another huge hit from Endgame, Blip was still moving, and then Endgame's weapon stopped working. And honestly, this bit is where the main event did fall off a bit for me, as both robots ended up becoming a bit more of a pushing match, and it wasn't that kind of exciting match where Quantum grabbed Shredder in and just threw it all around. Like, neither robot really had the ability to really ram each other around. I mean, Blip couldn't because of the ground clearance issues, and I don't know what Endgame's drive is like, but I guess it couldn't either. Endgame ended up winning the judges' decision, and honestly, for 75% of this match, this was a main event level match, with just some amazing hits from Endgame, that great durability you'd expect from a robot like Blip, the use of the pulverizers. It was looking great, and it just fell off towards the end. I don't think that last quarter ruins the main event, it was a bit of a shame really. Now looking at the schedules, Endgame's is not what I would have expected of former champions, so I think they've got them well in hand. Blip's schedule meanwhile looks nice and competitive. I think there's a lot of chance for Blip to really get to show itself off despite this initial loss. I don't know if it's going to walk away with enough wins to progress beyond this point, but I think we're going to get to see some incredible flips either way. Overall, I'll admit this episode was weaker than the first. The episode no doubt had some amazing fights in it, such as Fusion vs Emulsifier, which was my match of the night, Whiplash vs Mad Catter, which was an incredible display from Mad Catter, and for the most part the main event was pretty good too, but a few of the fights fell short of my expectations. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this review. If you did, please be sure to leave a like on this video to show your support. Leave a comment and tell me what you thought of this episode of Battlebots. Share this video around with your friends, that would be super appreciated to get more eyes on the channel. And yeah, I'll see you all next time. Bye guys!